Sorry about that long intro, but thought it'd be fun to throw that song onto the intro videos I've made for this channel so far, and strangely it works, doesn't it? Anyways, on to Friday the 13th Carnival of Maniacs, Chapter 11. It was well past 6 when the FBI agents reached Wessex County, and an arboreal gloom was suffocating the headlamps of the Chrysler, forcing Tollison to make heavy use of the GPS. "We're almost there," he said, pointing at the navigator. Kyler glanced at her map and saw they were less than a mile from the location specified in the Sawicki message. "We're losing the light," she commented. "I'm more worried about the sheriff," added Tollison. "Do you think he'll show?" Kyler had phoned the local sheriff en route and had requested his assistance, only to be told that he was sick and tired of Voorhees' nonsense. Furthermore, the sheriff could state with absolute certainty that the message she'd received was a hoax. "Just like the one I got last night." At which point Kyler had forcefully reminded the sheriff of his duties. "Look." Kyler angled her head towards the windshield, and the squad car parked just ahead on the roadside, its lights in full swing. Tollison eased on the brakes and nosed the Chrysler close to the police vehicle. "Okay," he said, straightening his back. "You're unofficial, remember? So let me handle the introductions." Normally, as the senior agent, Kyler would have done the meeting and greeting, but her partner's suggestion made sense, and so she hung back as he got out and walked up to the sheriff. "Thanks for coming out," said Tollison, presenting his ID. "I'm Special Agent Tollison, and this," he pointed back at Michelle, "is Special Agent Kyler." The sheriff tipped the brim of his hat. "John Haslett, Crystal Lake." Kyler noticed the sheriff had come out alone, but surprisingly he wasn't displaying any hostility. Evidently he too was good at reading body language, because he immediately directed his comments in her direction. "After you called," he started, "I ran a check on the number." "It was a cell phone," Kyler interrupted, joining them. "Registered in the name of Sawicki?" "Half right." Haslip wasn't the least bit smug in his correction. "The owner's someone called Richard Willis." Kyler turned to her partner. "Must be the boy she mentioned. Trick?" "He was one of the 2 kids I spoke to," said Haslip, frowning. "Do you make a habit of ignoring emergency calls, Sheriff Haslip?" asked Kyler coolly. The cop held his ground. "Only when they're fake. Listen, a carnival came through town last night and upset some of the residents. So I moved them on, and within an hour I got the call. It's just their way of stirring up trouble." Kyler stepped up to within a couple of feet of the sheriff. "This morning," she said firmly, "I received a message from Gloria Sawicki. She claims 2 of her friends were murdered near this position, and that Jason Voorhees is responsible." Haslip shook his head. "That's what I mean. Jason this, Jason that, always Jason. With all due respect, Agent Kyler, I've heard it 1,000 fucking times. Crystal Lake's a magnet for these freaks and weirdos." "So as far as you're concerned," said Kyler, her voice rising, "it's all just a sick joke?" "That's right." "And 2 kids weren't murdered out here, and you didn't even bother to check?" The sheriff stared blankly and let his silence do the talking. Kyler turned to her partner. "Get a lamp and start searching over there." She indicated the trees on the northern side of the road. Glad to be getting out of the heat, Tollison went back to his car, took a flashlight out of the trunk, and then went off into the woods. Kyler watched her partner until he was out of sight, giving Haslip a chance to study her. Plainly attractive, dark brown suit, no makeup, looking for a fight. There was something seductively powerful about Agent Kyler. Suddenly she turned, and the sheriff blurted out the first thing he could think of. "So where's Sawicki now?" "She called for Madonna and Reculver," answered Kyler, "but we haven't been able to reach her since." "Well, that clinches it," said the sheriff. "I sent the carnival that way myself. Boy, did I get that woman wrong." "Woman?" Kyler caught the faint whiff of misconduct. "What woman?" "Alice Whitney," replied the sheriff. "She's the cause of all of this. She couldn't get me riled by calling at the office, so now she's got you on my back." Suddenly, Kyler wasn't feeling so sure of herself. A potential suspect had just made an unexpected entrance. raising the possibility that both Kyler and her enigmatic ally in the black limousine had been fooled by a couple of dumb prank calls. The agent was considering what to do next when Tollison rushed out onto the road and threw up. His puke splashed and splattered on the asphalt, and immediately galvanized the air with the cheesy stench of stomach acid. "Ah, I think I just found Willis," he groaned before heaving some of his lunch onto the blacktop. The news reporter crouched behind the wall as a further series of explosions went off in the distance. Despite the fact that he was wearing a flak jacket and had chosen to appear before camera wearing military-style khakis, the unshaven young man was clearly terrified. He was also rapping his report. "One thing remains certain. Until the situation here in Baghdad is stabilized, more American lives will be lost. Ken Sears, LACA News, Iraq." "Thanks, Ken," said the anchorman, even though Sears had sent the recording in 5 hours ago. "Now back to our top story. Shock rock legend Nosferatu behind bars. Earlier this afternoon, thousands of viewers saw the star arrested live on air when he gate-crashed daytime hit reality show Cantania of Joy, wearing a costume based on the is he or isn't he real serial killer Jason Voorhees. Ferratu ran in front of the cameras and attacked Mrs. Finville with a prop machete. The Academy Award-winning actress escaped unharmed, but was drenched in stage blood, as not only her security staff, but Ferratu's own people fought to subdue him. Police then arrived to arrest the singer, who was handcuffed and taken to the local station. At the moment, it's unclear exactly what charges he's facing, but it's understood that 8 separate misdemeanors are involved. Commentators are already dismissing the attack as a publicity stunt. Ferratu's new album, Making Kruger My Bitch, was released just last week and is the first disc in the singer's spectacular career not to have entered the charts. Well, a few moments ago, reporter Sardis Winterton spoke to Nosferatu's manager, Luke Veranti. Viewers are advised that this interview has been censored. The camera held with the steadiness of a forced tin gel as it buffeted up tight against the puffy pale face and the dense black jacket and polo neck of the short media executive. "I'm not that manager. You want to speak to his manager? Go talk to that of a porn star. Now get that piece of out of my face, you dumb." The writing on the sign read Hunt Ridge 4. Just 4 more miles and Pamela would be reunited with her son. Even now, behind the wheel of the shaky old van, Pamela could hear Jason calling to her, his tormented wails drowning out that other voice, the voice of the girl Pamela had overpowered. Glow looked at herself in the rear view and laughed. "There's no point fighting, dear," she smiled. "Can't you see? You don't exist anymore. Not even your mother would recognize you now." Suddenly, her hands wrenched the steering wheel over to the left, aiming Swinburne's truck straight towards a wall of massive oak trees. "I won't let you!" The vocal cords and the mind vibrating them both belonged to Gloria Sawicki. Now, dear," grimaced Pamela, struggling to bring the girl's body back under her influence. "That's not very nice. That's not very nice at all. You know I'll have to punish you." The tires kicked up dust from the shoulder before the truck veered and regained its rightful place along the center of the lane. Glow had failed in her attempt to defeat Pamela through suicide, and now she felt her dwindling life force being sucked into the maelstrom of Pamela's cruelty. "I thought we might be friends," said Pamela with a hint of regret. "But I guess it's time to say goodbye. It's a pity. I don't get along with many people, and I had to wait a long time before I found you. You're special." Glow's failing life force tried to fight, to resist. She knew that, when Pamela finished speaking, her flame would be extinguished once and for all. "Thanks to you," Pamela continued, "I'm going to find my son. You see, I've been away for far too long. Crystal Lake's become a mess, so I'm going to take Jason home, and then we'll clear out all the trash. But first, I've got to make Jason better. He's sick, you know. That's why he hasn't killed those brutes at the carnival. But don't you worry. I know how to fix my Jason. By tomorrow, Jason won't need the silly old moon anymore. With that, Pamela tensed her stolen body and concentrated her willpower on one final task. A task that would stop the little bitch from interfering ever again. She could hear a recessed whisper in an alcove of her mind. She smiled. It was begging her for mercy. And then it fell silent. Glow was dead. Kyler watched as Trick was zipped up in a body bag. Then she rejoined Tollison and Sheriff Haslip in the eye of the kind of 911 storm Crystal Lake hadn't seen in years. Squad cars, medics, photographers, floodlights, forensics teams. The forest was crawling with investigators, all working towards the one goal of identifying the killer. "Sheriff," a voice crackled over Haslip's radio. "We found the other girl, and there's a hut with 3 more bodies." Kyler listened to the message intently. "Please confirm," responded the sheriff. 2 female civilians and a male police officer. The bodies look 10, 20, maybe 30 years old." "Jesus," gasped Haslip. "What's going on?" Kyler didn't hesitate to offer her opinion. "So Wiki said she came searching for Voorhees artifacts. She didn't mention a hut, but maybe that's where it all started. Maybe she found something there. Maybe even Jason." "I don't have time for this," said the sheriff. He tried to pass by, but Kyler wouldn't budge. "You didn't have time for their call either," she jibed. Tollison quickly stepped forward. Look, Sheriff, we're all on the same team here, and..." "Then stop wasting my time with all this Jason shit," barked Haslip. "All right, I made a mistake. You can put that in your report if you want. But this is just a sick copycat. That's all. There's been one of them before. A paramedic. Remember?" And then he set off in the direction of the newly discovered bodies. "Strong work," muttered Tollison. But when he turned to look at Kyler, he saw that she too had gone, and was standing over by one of the forensics guys. The man was on his hands and knees and was pawing at a bare patch of dirt. "What is it?" she asked. 3 sets of prints," replied the investigator thoughtfully and quickly. "The boy's another set, possibly female, and..." "And?" prompted Kyler. "Slow down." "Male, size 13 work boots in poor condition. Weight, 300 to 400 pounds. "What about height?" she asked. The man rubbed his chin. "Difficult to tell, but from the stride I'd say 6'5", 6'6", thereabouts." "Some copycat," smiled Tollison grimly. "Was there an audition?" Kyler ignored the joke and grabbed the flashlight from Tollison's hand. Then she directed the beam down onto the footprints and started to fight her way through the bushes. "Hey!" called Tollison. "Where you think you're going?" Not wanting to be overheard, Kyler waved him over. "The sheriff's so eager to get the bodies in front of the medical examiner. He's letting them walk all over the place before they protected the prints. Look." She highlighted a clear set of indentions in the soil. "I think it's Sawicki." "Okay," Tollison nodded. "You check this out, and I'll go see what I can find out about the hut. That's if the sheriff will still talk to me." Kyler actually smiled, and then they split up. 20 paces on, she felt completely alone. All the floodlights and all of the voices and radio chatter faded into nothing as she followed the prints through the trees, around and back out onto the road. She was some 50 yards short of the emergency posse, but from the flashing lights she could see that the asphalt beneath her feet was a veritable Picasso of burnt rubber. She was surrounded by swirling tire marks, all from large vehicles like the trucks of a sideshow. And there was something else. A small object was glinting between the double yellows. It was hard, white, and had rough edges. Kyler went over for a closer look. It seemed impossible, but there was nothing else it could be. She bent down and picked up the broken piece of hockey mask. Sheriff Haslip had seen enough. He made sure everyone knew what they had to do, then made his way back towards the road. There was coffee being served in one of the vans, but he'd barely had a second to himself when he saw Kyler rushing towards him. "Sheriff," she called, quickening her pace. "We found 3 missing persons from the '84 incident," he said, anticipating her question. "What the hell were those kids doing here?" But Kyler was coming from a completely different angle. Sheriff, I need to know where you sent the carnival. What? He looked at her as if she'd gone crazy. You don't think they had anything to do with this shit? No, but I think they might have picked up Sawicki, she replied, not daring to tell him what she really thought. You serious? He asked suspiciously. She's the only eyewitness, Kyler insisted. We need her here. Haslip shook his head. I can't spare anyone. Maybe if I call ahead. No, said Kyler a little too abruptly. If she sees a uniform, it might scare her. But look, if I leave right now, I can have her back here in a few hours. The sheriff considered her proposal. Well, okay, he said. There's 4 trucks and an old man's in charge. Whitney. Seems a decent fella. But, and here's the thing, it's a horror show. Dr. Ghostman's Carnival of Terror. I told them to try their luck at Hunt Ridge, so if the girl's hitched up with them, that's where she'll be. Thank you, said Kyler, and she offered him her hand. As soon as we find her, I'll let you know. Haslip accepted her hand and shook it. If I'm not here, call the office. You got my number, right? I certainly have. She grimaced. Despite the tragic setting, the sheriff had to laugh. He'd screwed up this case from day one, and here was a girl from the bureau rubbing his face in his mess, like a dog that needed house training. Tallis, she started to shout, when she saw her partner emerge from the woods. He was holding his cell phone. I can't get a signal, he complained. It's the trees, explained Haslip. Use my radio. We don't have time, interrupted Kyler, hustling her partner back towards the Chrysler. Hey, he griped, what's going on? The girl's story was true, she whispered. Now shut up and get in the car. Sheriff Haslip drank his coffee, but as the agents prepared to leave, he couldn't decide if Kyler's departure was a cause for celebration or a matter of concern. Either way, it was going to be a very long night. George Whitney opened the door of the motorhome and looked out on Harper Field. The show was due to commence at 8:30, so that gave him 20 minutes to spare before putting on his Dr. Geistman outfit. That's assuming they would actually have an audience tonight. Normally, it was Kenton's duty to drum up publicity, but after Sparks and Vincenzo had built that accursed Voorhees display, it seemed that everyone had spent the afternoon either hiding or tearing one another apart. And yet, the show still had so many happy memories for the old man. He stepped down and enjoyed the stillness of the moment, among his beloved monsters. The exhibits had all been arranged in a row along one end of the field, facing into the huge clearing where, hopefully, a crowd would be gathered. At the start of the evening, each tableau would be shrouded in darkness. But then, as the show progressed, Whitney would present each item in turn, giving his spiel while his people operated the lights and special effects. His eyes glistened as he relived the innocence of a vampire's bite. He longed to return to a time when the wolfbane bloomed and the villagers warned him not to go on to the castle. A life of flaming torches and grave robbers, with no bills, no blackmailing scoundrels, no sluts masquerading as wives and daughters, no human nature at all. Gripping his cane, he hobbed in front of Camp Crystal Lake and shook a veined fist at Jason's dormant body. "Damn you, Voorhees!" he cursed. "This is all you're doing." "No, George." Unknown to the old man, Freely had been keeping pace behind him. "It's your fault. Be a man for once in your life and take some responsibility." George lifted his stick and pointed it at Jason. "I have half a mind to set fire to this godforsaken thing." "I wouldn't do that," Freely warned. "I hate to admit it, but your daughter's right. People will pay big bucks to see this jerk." "Please, Kenton," begged the old man, "don't make me present this monstrosity." "Don't make me present this monstrosity," laughed Freely. "George, what am I gonna do with you?" "What do you mean?" Kenton's mood turned into venom. "If you don't pitch Voorhees tonight, I'll kill you myself, you stinking old bastard." Whitney cowered from the threat and bowed his head in resignation. "All right," he intoned. "I'll do as you ask." "Just make sure you do," said Kenton. The two of them sidled away, completely unaware that Alice had been listening to them from her hiding place beneath the facsimile boat dock. She was now on her second bottle of Jack and was getting shit-faced. A canvas travel bag lay on the ground beside her, and, as she rested on her back, she patted the laptop tucked safely inside it. "Freely?" she slurred to no one in particular. "I don't use this word very often. In fact, I don't even like the word, but you are a total cunt." And with that, she blew a kiss towards the bolted crotch of the unconscious, machete-wielding savior, standing a mere couple of feet above her head, and then abruptly passed out. It was Kyler who was now behind the wheel of the Chrysler. Tollison couldn't help but flinch. She was thundering through the lake region as if all the hounds of hell were pursuing her. "You really think we'll find Sawicki and Hunt Ridge?" he asked, trying to relax. "No," she replied. The sky had turned mazarine, and Kyler could see a full moon rising over the hills. "Then what are we—" "I'm looking for Jason Voorhees," she cut in. I did a little research on that before I came to your apartment." "And?" she asked pointedly. "Jason Voorhees was killed in a bureau ambush in '93. The coroner reported explosive trauma, third-degree burns, multiple bullet—" "Do you know what happened to that coroner?" she interrupted. "As a matter of fact, I do. He ate some of Jason's remains and then killed over a dozen people. But it's because he was in collusion with Robert Campbell," he quickly added. "Either that or he was in the grip of some kind of hysteria." "Very good," Kylo remarked. "You've got the official line down to a T." But Tollison was undeterred. All the evidence proved beyond doubt that every one of the murders in the week subsequent to the ambush was committed either by the coroner or by Campbell. Campbell was a nut. He was using the deaths to promote a TV show that he was making. "You need to go back and do your homework," Kyler answered stonily. "Diana Kimball, Sheriff Landis, and Creighton Duke are just 3 victims I can think of whose deaths couldn't be attributed to either of the 2 main suspects." "Kyler, come on. This is just some more zombie talk." Tollison was walking a fine line between trying to reason with his partner and pissing her off. "And that's Jason's most powerful defense," she replied. "He's killed hundreds of people, but the evidence is so confused we got him filed somewhere between Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy. In 1984, Jenny Field said in her statement that she found a hut containing 3 dead bodies, but there were doubts about her sanity, and police search turned up nothing. Now I'm positive that's the same hut. 3 bodies, one of them a cop. Field said she thought the place was Jason's home. So Sawicki and her friends come along, they find the place, and now 2 of them are dead." "But we've no evidence Jason's involved," argued Tollison. "We don't know why Sawicki said what she did. She's just a kid." "Mel, size 13 work boots." Kyler was repeating the description of the killer's footprints. 300 to 400 pounds, 6'5". But that could be any big guy. Tollison was determined to keep his partner honest. But suddenly she wasn't listening to him, because there was something else Field had said in her statement, about something she'd found in the shack. A phone rang. "Must have a signal," Corey observed. He took the cell out of his jacket and answered the call. A terse conversation, during which the young man did most of the listening. When it was over, he sat back in stunned silence. "Can you talk about it?" Kyler tried to sound cool, though her ears were definitely burning. "That was Landau," answered Tollison with a gulp. "He knows you're here, and he wants me to take your badge. You're to be suspended from duty immediately." Kyler suddenly remembered the fat man's warning. "Within 24 hours, you're going to be suspended from duty. You can't trust anyone, Miss Kyler, least of all your junior partner." She kept her hands firmly on the wheel, but her grip on the situation was beginning to unravel. Alice awoke to the familiar sound of a wolf howling over a crack of thunder, and the ominous organ melody of Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. She was still lying in the crawlspace beneath the Voorhees display, and it was completely dark, but she knew the drill well enough to realize that the show was about to begin. She felt inside the pocket of her pilot's jacket. Good, the keys were still there. A few hours from now, and she'd put Jason aboard the RV, take off, and leave the dirty bastards to rot in hell. Suddenly, she heard voices. It was Freely. "Have you seen Alice?" "The fucking bitch stole my computer," whined Judge. "All right," snapped Kenton. "I don't need your life story. Just make sure nothing goes wrong with the show." The introductory tape had a couple more minutes left to run, but when the coffin creaked, a smoke bomb would go off. Dr. Geisman would step out to greet the audience, and everyone would be tied up until the end of the performance. Alice took a swig from the half-empty bottle and scuttled over to peek through a gap in the wooden base. She couldn't believe it. The field was full of people. Families, senior citizens, gangs of teenagers, children. It looked as if the whole town had come out. And then her dad came out. As much as her dad's voice was always gruntled, and it sounded like it was hard for him to speak, whenever he took the role of Dr. Geisman, somehow he pulled it off. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," boomed a voice over the PA. "My name is Dr. Geistman, and I bid you welcome." There was a loud cheer as 2 flashpots were ignited, and Alice decided it was time to go out and take a look. She grabbed the travel bag and got up from behind the Crystal Lake tableau, only to discover she was drunk as a fart. She sniggered and teetered out into the middle of the crowd. Rows of vehicles were parked along the far side of Harper Field, but Alice noticed a latecomer arriving in a beat-up old van, some riding on the side of the junk heap read, "Swinburne's Hardware." She drank some more Jack and then watched her father. Seeing him standing there in the lights, wearing his ghoulish ringmaster's costume, doing his Dracula impersonation, she could have been 7 years old again. God, he seemed so happy. "Tonight, ladies and gentlemen," he was saying, "I will be unveiling the remains of the most notorious serial killer in the history of crime. I dare you. Look inside the hockey mask, at the hideous face of the monster. And who among you will be brave enough to touch the machete that hacked 100 bloody corpses into pieces?" Just then, Eli Brooks, a skinny, ginger-haired boy standing near to Alice, started nudging his 4 friends. "This blows Major League chunks," he moaned. "There's no concessions, no merchandise. And if you want to take a leak, you gotta go in the corner of the fucking field. If these morons don't deliver some seriously awesome content, I'm going straight on the net." "Let's trash this place," said one of the others excitedly. A third teen put his hands to his mouth and hollered, "You suck!" People started to laugh. "I can see," Whitney said, raising his hands. "Some of you are growing impatient. You're asking yourselves, is it really true? Do they really have the body of the immortal Jason Voorhees?" "No!" shouted the ginger punk. "We're asking ourselves why we wasted our money on this horse shit." More laughs. The mood was turning ugly. However, the old man hadn't been in the business over 40 years without learning how to work an audience. "Very well," he proclaimed. "I shall prove to the skeptics among you that Crystal Lake Killer is standing here on this very field. Prepare to witness the very first unveiling of Jason Voorhees!" A recording of a woman's scream ripped through the speakers. Red lights came to life around Jason, and then nothing. The maniac merely stood there, posing in mid-slaughter like any other waxwork. The sense of anticlimax was almost palpable. "What does he do?" heckled Eli. "I'll show you," came a voice from the back. Glow lifted the head from the seat of the van and held it up into the eerie whitewash of the moon. Jason burst into life, and the crowd roared with delight. "Finally!" smiled the boy. "We get some action!" The whiskey bottle fell from Alice's hand, as she alone realized that the killer's violent eruption was not part of the act. "Oh my God," she muttered, sobering up in a second. Alice ran forward through the tightly packed bodies, her eyes fixed on Jason as he broke free of the chain that was keeping him fastened to the uprights. Sparks had posed the maniac using uncoiled wire hangers, and now Jason was plucking the twist of metal away from his joints, frustrated by the impediments. "Dad, run!" cried Alice, but her father couldn't hear her above the delight of the audience. He was still facing the people, and he seemed to have no idea that Jason had come alive behind him. "Dad!" Jason tried to bring the machete down on the back of Whitney's head, but the blade had been wired to his wrist, so it came loose and fell onto the boat dock. The noise brought George to his senses. He turned just as Jason reached out, pulled an entire window frame away from the wall of the fake cabin, and brought it crashing down around the old man's head. The killer kept his hands on the wood and shook the window like a prospector, panning for epileptic gold, ramming and splitting the shards of glass in and out of Whitney's face. The old man screamed as the razor pane pierced his eyes, tore up his teeth, and slashed into his arteries. His body juddered and stiffened as Jason transmitted the full force of his psychopathic wrath into the sheet of cracked glazing. Then Jason lifted the frame high above his head, the old man's feet kicking and twitching above the stage, and threw the window and George Whitney into the front row of the audience. The showman hit the ground in a shatter of mulched and heaving flesh. Alice fell to her knees and screamed, and behind her, the flame-haired Brooks turned to his friends and shouted, "Now that's cool!" Okay, this has been Chapter 11 of Friday the 13th Carnival of Maniacs. And I almost feel bad leaving it there because I want to know what happens next, and I want to know right now. Let me know what you guys thought of tonight's chapter. I thought it was a very action-packed chapter. We got a lot of story from a lot of different characters, and it's all finally coming to a head. I look forward to hearing what you guys think so far, and I'll be back very soon with some more Friday the 13th Carnival of Maniacs. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, don't stop me now. I'm having such a good time. Have a good night. I'll see you next time.